Eli was just an ordinary man living on Earth, far from the problems of the galaxy. He never imagined he would one day find himself on an alien planet, surrounded by strange beings and even stranger customs. All it took was one mistake, one small accident, and suddenly his life was thrown into chaos. It all started when Eli, an engineer working in a small space station, received a strange transmission one evening. It wasn't the usual communication from Earth or from any known spacefaring race. The message was short, a simple SOS signal, but it had a twist. The message was encoded in a way Eli had never seen before. Odd. And after some quick calculations, he realized it wasn't meant for any human eyes. He had stumbled upon something dangerous, and his curiosity got the better of him. Within hours, a fleet of ships arrived, ships that weren't human at all. Their sleek, powerful designs were unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Before Eli could comprehend what was happening, a massive ship descended from the sky, landing in front of the space station. It was a sight so alien, it took his breath away. As the doors of the ship opened, a group of beings walked out, their figures tall and imposing. They were the Xandari, an alien species known across the galaxy for their strength and advanced technology. Eli had heard stories about them, but never in his wildest dreams did he expect to meet them in person. He tried to remain calm, standing still as the beings approached. But one figure caught his eye. Their leader, Empress Zalia, the ruler of the Xandari, stood before him. She was unlike any being Eli had ever seen. Her eyes, a shimmering shade of purple, glowed softly in the dim light, and her presence radiated power. She was beautiful in a way that was hard to describe, with sharp features and a confident stride. Eli felt a wave of awe wash over him, though he quickly reminded himself to stay focused. Human Empress Zalia's voice rang out, deep and commanding. "You have seen our message. You are not meant to be here. Yet you are." Eli wasn't sure if she was asking or commanding him, but the air felt thick with tension. He swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "I didn't mean to intercept your message." "It was an accident," he said quickly, his voice shaking slightly. I didn't even know it was for anyone else." Zalia studied him, her gaze piercing, as though she were seeing into the depths of his soul. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and Eli could only wonder what was going through her mind. Finally, she spoke again, but this time her tone softened. "You are here now," she said, "and you will remain. There is something in you, human, something intricate alien symbols." In the center, a throne sat, seemingly made of some kind of glowing material that pulsed softly. Zalia took her seat, and Eli found himself standing before her, unsure of what to do next. Without warning, she turned to the gathered Xandari nobles, her court, who had been silently watching them from the sides. She raised her voice so all could hear. "I have made a decision," she announced. "This human will stay with us. He will be my chosen mate." The words struck Eli like a bolt of lightning. The room fell silent. Eli looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. The court stared at him with a mix of disbelief, confusion, and something else, something he couldn't quite place. Zalia's gaze never left him. "You will learn our ways. You will understand why I have chosen you. There is much for you to learn, human, much for you to teach us." Eli stood there, still trying to process everything. Mate. He wasn't even sure if he understood what that meant in this context. All he knew was that his life, which had been simple and predictable, was now anything but. He had been thrown into something far larger than he could have imagined. And there was no turning back. The court murmured. Among themselves, their voices low, some clearly angry, others curious. Eli could feel their eyes on him, but Empress Zalia paid them no mind. She turned back to him, a faint smile on her lips. "This will change everything," she said softly, almost to herself. "The galaxy will never be the same." Eli couldn't help but wonder if he was ready for the storm that was coming. But one thing was certain. His life had just taken a turn into the unknown. Eli stood frozen, his heart racing in his chest. The Empress's words still echoed in his ears. She had chosen him. chosen him as her mate right in front of her entire court. It felt like the room was spinning, and every eye in the chamber was focused on him. He didn't know what to say, what to think, or even how to react. The nobles in the room murmured to each other in a language he couldn't understand. Eli glanced around, noticing the varied reactions from the Zandari court. Some looked surprised, others seemed angry, and a few wore expressions that were difficult to read. But all eyes were on him now, felt as if he was being judged, his every move under a microscope. The pressure was overwhelming. Empress Zalia remained calm, her expression unchanged. She was still seated on her glowing throne, her gaze fixed. On Eli, he could feel the weight of her authority in every glance she cast in his direction. She was a powerful ruler, and even though he was just a human, she had chosen him. For reasons he couldn't understand, he was now tied to her and her kingdom. The court's whispers grew louder, and Eli could only stand there, feeling out of place. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. He was an engineer. From Earth, someone who had spent his life working with machines and fixing things. How had he ended up here, in the middle of an alien court, about to be the mate of an empress? "Do you have anything to say, human? Empress?" Zalia's voice broke through his thoughts. Her tone was calm but commanding, as though she expected. In answer, Eli opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he stammered, looking around at the members of the court. "I'm just an engineer. I don't belong here." One of the nobles in the back of the room, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with dark blue skin, stepped forward. His expression was harsh, and he spoke in a deep voice that made Eli's heart skip a beat. "You're right," the noble said, his eyes narrowing. "You don't belong here. No human does. This is an insult to our people, Empress." Eli's heart sank. Would expected some sort of resistance, but hearing it spoken so openly made him feel small, insignificant. The noble's words hung in the air, and Eli felt as if the court was collectively holding its breath. Waiting for Empress Zalia's reaction, Zalia's eyes flicked toward the noble, but her face remained calm. "You speak of insults, Garros," she said coolly, "but you forget who rules this empire. I have made my decision, and it is not up for debate." Her voice was firm, carrying the weight of authority that only an empress could possess. Garros hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback by the empress's response. The tension in the room was palpable, and Eli could feel the cold stares of the court on him. He was an outsider, a human who had no place in this alien world. Yet here he was, chosen by the most powerful being in the room. Another voice broke. The silence, softer one, from a woman who stood near the front of the court. She had long silver hair and wore elegant robes that shimmered in the dim light. "But Empress," she said gently, "this is not the way our people have ever done things. No one has ever chosen a mate from another species. It will cause unrest." Turned his attention to the woman, his curiosity piqued. Words were more measured than Garrus's harsh criticism, but they still carried a sense of caution. It seemed like the court wasn't as unified as Zalia's choice had hoped. Zalia stood up from her throne, her posture regal and commanding. "The galaxy changes," she said, her voice loud and clear. "The old ways no longer serve us. Choose this human, because I believe he is the one who will help us evolve. He is different, and that is why I need him by my side." The room fell silent once more. Eli could see the doubt in the eyes of some nobles, while others looked intrigued. Their interest piqued by the Empress's words. It was clear that not everyone agreed with her decision, but Zalia's power was absolute. She would not be swayed by the opinions of her court. Eli glanced at the other nobles, unsure of how to react. He had never imagined anything like this. What happened in his life? His mind was racing, trying to process the situation. How was he supposed to fit in with a powerful alien empire, especially now that the court was divided on his presence? Zalia turned to Eli, her eyes softening slightly. "You will have time to adjust to our ways," she said, her voice no longer as cold. "But you will not be a stranger here for long. I will see to it that you understand our culture, our laws, and our traditions. You will learn human. I expect nothing less." Eli nodded, still in a state of disbelief. He couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. But there was one thing he knew for certain. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. As the court continued to murmur among themselves, Zalia's gaze remained on Eli. Despite the tension in the room, there was something in her eyes, a hint of hope, perhaps even a hint of trust. She had made her choice, and now it was up to Eli to prove himself worthy of it. But deep down, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than he could have ever expected. The court may have its doubts, but he had to learn quickly if he was to survive in this strange new world. Eli had never felt so out of place in his entire life. Every day in the Zandari Palace seemed to bring new challenge, gaze new customs, and new things that he had to learn. The Zandari were a proud and ancient species, and their ways were foreign to him in every sense. From the moment he had stepped into the palace, he had been thrust into their world. He could barely begin to understand. But Empress Zalia, as strange as it felt, seemed determined to help him adjust. And though he didn't always understand her decisions, Eli could feel her confidence, the weight of her position, and perhaps some strange kindness beneath it all. The first few days after the public announcement had been a whirlwind of confusion. Eli had been taken to his quarters, a lavish room that seemed far too grand for someone like him. He still couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. He had never been prepared for something like this, an accidental encounter with an alien species, let alone being chosen as a mate for their ruler. But Zalia had been patient with him. She had assigned one of her trusted attendants, a quiet, young woman named Lyra, to guide him through the basics of Zandari culture. Lyra was kind but firm, offering Eli only the information he needed, one step at a time. "The first thing you must understand, human," Lyra had said on the third day, "is that we are a people of great honor. Every decision is made with the weight of that honor. The Empress has chosen you, and you must respect that decision." Eli nodded, unsure of what respect meant in this context. He didn't know what it meant. Toe silence that accompanied each meal. No one spoke unless spoken to. It was a solemn affair, and Eli couldn't help but feel a little out of place. He had grown up in a culture where meals were social events, filled with conversation and laughter. But here, everything was structured, organized, and purposeful. One evening, during one such feast, Empress Zalia herself had approached Eli. She sat next to him at the long table, her presence commanding the attention of everyone around her. The court, usually a hive of quiet whispers, fell into a deeper silence. She smiled slightly, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "I see you are learning our ways," she said softly, her voice as commanding as it was gentle. "But tell me, human, what do you think of our customs?" Eli had hesitated before responding. He didn't want to insult her, but the truth was, he was struggling. It's very different," he said cautiously. "It's the way you all communicate, the silence. It's hard to get used to." Zalia's smile widened, but there was no malice in her expression. "Our ways are not meant to be easy for outsiders to understand, but that is part of our strength. We do not rely on words as much as others do. Actions speak louder here." Eli nodded, trying to absorb her words. He was starting to understand that every move the Zandari made was intentional. Every gesture, every word was part of a carefully constructed system designed to maintain order and respect. It was a system that didn't leave much room for error, and certainly not for mistakes. The next day, Zalia introduced Eli to one of the most important aspects of Zandar life. Their warriors. The Zandari were a fierce, battle-hardened species, and their warriors were treated like royalty. Eli had never been a fighter. He was an engineer, someone who fixed things and built machines. But here, in the presence of the warriors, he felt a strange sense of awe. The warriors were tall, their bodies covered in intricate armor that shimmered under the palace lights. Their movements were graceful, but filled with power. Zalia had arranged for Eli to train with them, hoping that it would teach him not only their fighting techniques, but their mindset. War is not just about strength, Zalia had explained, as she watched Eli struggle with the basic techniques. It is about understanding the enemy and yourself. It is about knowing when to strike and when to retreat. Eli wasn't sure if he could ever understand the Zandari warriors, but he did. His best, the training was intense, and his muscles ached with each new lesson. But there was something about it that intrigued him. Despite his doubts, he found himself wanting to learn more about the Zandari, their ways, and why Zelia had chosen him. It was in moments like these, when the court was quiet and the palace halls were empty, that Eli found himself alone with his thoughts. He would often stand by the windows, looking out over the alien world. The planet was beautiful, with vast oceans and towering mountain ranges that seemed to stretch on forever. It was so different from Earth yet, in some ways. It felt like he belonged here. But the more Eli learned about the Zandari, the more he realized that this wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't just learning their customs or their fighting techniques, he was learning a way of life that was built on centuries of tradition that wasn't going to let him, an outsider, become part of their world without a struggle. And yet, as he thought about Empress Zelia's decision, Eli couldn't help but wonder, was there more to this than just politics? Was there something deeper, something in his connection to her, that he couldn't yet understand? The answers were still out of reach, but Eli knew one thing for certain. His life was changing, and he was starting to change with it. Eli woke up early the next day, his mind still swirling with the events of the past few weeks. His life had turned upside down since he had arrived at the palace. From being an engineer on Earth to now being the chosen mate of an alien empress, everything felt strange. But as much as he had tried to ignore it, one thing had become undeniable. His growing connection with Empress Azalea. The more time Eli spent with her, the more he began to understand her. Azalea wasn't just a powerful ruler, she was someone who carried the weight of an entire species on her shoulders. The Zandari were a proud people, and their empress had to be stronger than anyone. She had shown Eli that she wasn't just a ruler who made decisions from her throne. She was active, involved, and constantly working to ensure the safety and growth of her empire. As much as Eli had tried to keep his distance, the pull between them was undeniable. Zelia had taken a special interest in his thoughts, his ideas. She asked him questions about Earth, about humans, about what they valued. In return, Eli found himself drawn to her wisdom, her strength, and her calm demeanor in the face of challenges. One afternoon, after a long training session with the warriors, Eli was sitting alone in the palace courtyard trying to catch his breath. He hadn't gotten used to the physical training yet, and his muscles were sore from the constant drills. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the courtyard. Eli closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the peaceful stillness of the palace. "You're improving," a voice said from behind him. Eli opened his eyes to find Zelia standing just a few feet away. She looked regal as always, her long silver hair flowing in the soft breeze. Her eyes, deep and full of mystery, were focused on him. "I don't know about that," Eli said, chuckling softly. "I can barely keep up with the warriors. They're fast, strong. Me." Zelia smiled, though her expression was thoughtful. "Strength isn't just about speed or power, it's about control. You have potential, Eli. You just need to understand your own limits and learn to push beyond them." Eli felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had never been much of a fighter, and he had assumed he would never be able to measure up to the warriors of the Zandari. But something about Zalia's calm assurance made him feel like maybe he could. Maybe he could be more than just an outsider in this strange world. The Empress stepped closer, and Eli noticed the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. It wasn't just the leader of a powerful empire that was before him. Now it was a person who, in her own way, was opening up to him. "I've been thinking," Zelia continued, "about what you told me when you first arrived, about how different everything is for you. I've seen the way you struggle to fit in. But the truth is, it's not just the Zandari ways that are foreign to you. You're also trying to figure out where you belong in all of this." Eli looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "I guess I've been struggling with that. I've been so focused on surviving here that I haven't really thought about what it means to be part of this, this world." Zalia nodded. "You may not realize it yet, but you are already part of it. You've brought sense of connection. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, about learning, growing, helping one another. For the first time since his arrival, Eli felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe his place in the Zandari world wasn't just about serving as a mate for their Empress. Maybe it was out something greater about finding his own purpose, helping to build something better. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the courtyard in a soft twilight glow, Zalia turned to leave. "I'll give you time to rest," she said. "Remember this, Eli. You are not alone here, not anymore." Eli watched her walk away, her figure slowly disappearing into the palace. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. There was a part of him that still felt like an outsider, but there was another part of him that felt something more. The connection between him and Zalia was growing, slowly but surely, in wit. Each passing day, Eli found himself thinking that maybe this strange new world was a place where he could belong. Eli was beginning to feel like he had found his place in the Zandari world. Each day he grew more accustomed to their ways, more confident in his role. He had become an important advisor to Empress Zalia, offering perspectives from a human point of view that no one else in the palace could provide. The Zandari were an advanced species, with a culture and history stretching back centuries. But there was still much they didn't understand, and that's where Eli came in. But everything changed one evening. Eli had just finished another training session with the warriors. He was growing stronger, though he still wasn't as fast or skilled as the Zandari. However, Zalia had been pleased with his progress. She had even allowed him to join her for private dinners where they discussed ideas about the future of the Zandari Empire. He was beginning to feel like an important part of her life, not just as a mate, but as someone who could help her lead. That evening, as Eli was walking through the palace corridors, something caught his attention. It wasn't the usual bustling sound of the palace servants or the distant chatter of the court. This time, the hallway was unusually quiet, and the shadows seemed deeper than normal. A sense of unease crept into Eli's chest. He had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, something didn't feel right. He paused, listening carefully. The faint sound of voices reached his ears, coming from around the corner. The voices were low, almost as if they were trying to be quiet, but Eli could still make out the words. "We can't let her do this," one voice said, a male voice. It sounded familiar, but Eli couldn't place it. "The human cannot be allowed to stay. This is a betrayal to our people." Eli's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the voice now. It was Garros, the noble who had challenged Zalia's decision when she first announced him as her mate. Eli's mind raced as he leaned closer to the corner, trying to make out the rest of the conversation. "He is weak," Garros continued. "He will never be one of us. We cannot let Zalia's choice destroy the strength of our empire." Another voice spoke, this one a woman's. "You're right, the Empress is making a mistake. We need to act before it's too late," Eli felt. His stomach twist. He knew they were talking about him, but it wasn't just about him. They were talking about Zalia's leadership and the future of the Zandari Empire. What they didn't know was that their plan was about to fall apart because Eli wasn't just listening. He had heard enough. Without thinking, he stepped out. From his hiding place, moving swiftly but quietly toward the voices. As soon as he entered the chamber where Garros and the others were speaking, they froze. The moment they saw him, their faces turned pale. "What is this?" Eli's voice was low but firm. He didn't know what had been planned, but he wasn't about to let them get away with it. "What are you plotting?" Garros stepped forward, a sneer forming on his face. "You should have stayed in your place, human," he said, his tone mocking. "You have no understanding of our people, of our ways. Your presence here is an insult, and your usefulness has come to an end." Eli's mind raced, but he stood his ground. "I may not understand everything about your culture, but I know betrayal when I see it." The woman who had spoken earlier shot a glance at Garros before speaking up. "Think you can stop us?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The Empress has made her decision, but that decision weakens us all. If we don't act now, the Zandari will fall." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard whispers of dissatisfaction within the court, but he never imagined it would come to this. These nobles weren't just unhappy with his presence. They were planning something dangerous, something that could destroy everything Zalia had worked for. I won't let you harm her, Eli said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. I won't let you destroy the bond we've built, Garros laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty room. The Empress is a fool. She's too blinded by her feelings for you to see the truth. You're nothing but a distraction, a weak, foolish human who doesn't belong here. Before Eli could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the door to the chamber opened. Zalia stepped inside, her expression fierce. She took in the scene with a glance, her eyes immediately locking on Eli. What is going on here? She demanded, her voice filled with authority. Eli turned to face her, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. They were planning to betray you, he said, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. They think that I don't belong here, that I'm a threat to your empire. Zalia's gaze moved from Eli to the nobles in the room. Her eyes hardened as she took in their faces. So this is how it is, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You would conspire against me, against everything we've built, just to keep power for yourselves? The woman, clearly terrified, took a step back. We only wanted to protect the Zendari from weakness. Zalia's eyes burned with cold fury. You are the weakness, she said, her voice like ice. Not him. You have betrayed me, and you will answer for it. Eli watched as Zalia's power filled the room. The court's future, the very fate of the Zandari Empire, rested in her hands. And in that moment, Eli realized just how much he had come to rely on her, and how much she relied on him. With a final glance at the conspirators, Zalia turned to Eli, her expression softening. You've done more than just help me, Eli. You've shown me what true loyalty looks like. Eli, though still shaken, nodded. The danger wasn't over. But for the first time, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just an outsider. Anymore, he was part of something much larger. Something worth fighting for. The palace was still in an uneasy silence after the betrayal had been revealed. Eli had expected consequences, but he hadn't anticipated how quickly things would escalate. Zalia had acted swiftly to remove the conspirators, but Eli could see the strain in her eyes. Her empire was in turmoil, and not just because of the traitors, it was because her people were beginning to question her judgment. The court was divided, and there were whispers about the future of the Zandari Empire. Eli knew that their problems weren't over. He had been a witness to the distrust and fear that had been growing in the palace, and it wasn't just coming from the nobles. Even some of the warriors, who had once welcomed him as a symbol of Zalia's progressive thinking, were now looking at him with suspicion. They saw him as a human, an outsider, who had no place among their people. And despite Zalia's loyalty to him, Eli could feel the tension growing. That night, as the palace slept, Eli stood by the window of his chambers, staring out into the vast, starry sky. He had never felt so far from home. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He wasn't just the mate of an empress now. He was caught in the middle of a brewing conflict that could destroy everything Zalia had worked for. But more than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was coming, something that none of them could prepare for. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the hallways, followed by the sound of rushing footsteps. Eli's heart raced as he turned away from the window, instinctively reaching for the small dagger he had been given for protection. His training with the warriors had prepared him for many things, but this felt different. This wasn't just a skirmish between nobles, it was something worse. Within seconds, his door burst open, and a breathless Lyra, Zalia's trusted attendant, rushed in. The palace is under attack, she gasped. The traitors. They've joined forces with an outside enemy. They've sent a fleet to destroy us. Eli's blood ran cold. His mind raced, trying to process the information. Who is attacking? Us, he asked, though he already had a sinking feeling he knew the answer. Another faction, Lyra explained. A rival empire that has been waiting for the right moment to strike. They've allied with the traitors in the court, hoping to weaken Zalia's rule. They want to seize control of the Zandari Empire for themselves. Eli's fists clenched at his sides. This was not just about a political conspiracy. It was a full-blown war. He had to act quickly. There was no time to waste. "Where is Zalia?" Eli asked, his voice steady, despite the storm raging in his chest. "She's in the war room," Lyra replied. "But she needs your help, Eli." "She's been preparing you came," Zalia said, her voice both relieved and determined. "I need your help, Eli. We're about to face a battle that could determine the future of my empire. I cannot do this alone." Eli met her gaze, feeling the full weight of her trust in him. He had never seen her so vulnerable, yet so strong. It was in that moment that Eli understood just how much she had sacrificed for her people and how much she had staked on their future together. "I'm with you, Zalia," Eli said, his voice firm. "We'll fight this together." Zalia nodded, and without hesitation, she turned back to the table. Pointing to the holographic map that displayed the positions of their forces, "The enemy fleet is just hours away," she said. "We have a small window to prepare. I need you to help coordinate our defense. You know my people better than anyone here. You can give us the edge we need." Eli glanced at the map, quickly assessing the situation. The Zandari forces were spread thin, and the enemy's fleet was much larger. But there was one thing Eli had learned from his training. The Zandari may be powerful, but they were also overconfident. If he could use air own tactics against them, they might just have a chance. He spent the next several hours helping Zalia and her generals organize the defense. He suggested unconventional tactic strategies that the Zandari would never have considered. Eli knew the element of surprise would be their best weapon. He also made sure that Zalia's warriors were ready, instructing them to rely on their agility and precision, rather than brute strength. As the sun began to rise, the palace was ready. The Zandari forces had taken their positions, and Eli stood beside Zalia, looking out over the battlefield. The enemy fleet was visible now, a massive armada filling the sky. It was a terrifying sight, but Eli felt a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Zalia the warriors, and the entire Zandari Empire standing with him. The battle began with a roar. The sky filled with flashes of light as the two forces collided. Eli and Zalia stood at the center, commanding their troops, making split-second decisions as the tide of battle shifted. The traitors, who had once thought themselves in control, were now struggling to keep their positions as the battle raged on. Eli found himself in the thick of it, fighting alongside the Zandari warriors. His human strength wasn't as great as theirs, but his quick thinking and ability to adapt to the ever-changing situation gave him an edge. And with every victory, the bond between him and Zalia grew stronger. Finally, after hours of fighting, the enemy fleet began to retreat. The Zandari had held their ground. Zalia's leadership, combined with Eli's unexpected strategies, had saved her empire. As the smoke cleared, Eli looked over at Zalia, his heart filled with admiration. "We did it," he said, breathless. Zalia smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "No, we did it. The battle had been hard fought, but it was over. The enemy fleet had retreated, and the palace was no longer under threat. The Zandari had survived, and Zalia's leadership had been proven stronger than ever." Eli stood beside her, watching the aftermath of the conflict. There was no victory celebration, no cheering. Instead, the air was filled with the somber realization that the fight wasn't truly over. But one thing was certain: the Zandari Empire had been saved, and its future was now in safer hands. The palace grounds, which had been filled with tension and fear just hours before, now felt still and calm. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. It was a quiet evening, but Eli knew it wasn't over. Zalia had led her people to victory, but the consequences of the battle were just beginning to unfold. Eli turned to Zalia, who stood silently next to him. She hadn't spoken much since the battle ended, and he could sense the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The Zandari Empire was safe for now, but the scars of betrayal and war would last much longer. "You've done it," Eli said quietly, breaking the silence. "You've saved your people." Zalia didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out over the palace grounds, her gaze distant. We've saved them, she said, her voice soft. It's not just about surviving. It's about rebuilding. It's about trust. Eli nodded, understanding what she meant. The battle had exposed the cracks in the Empire, and there would be much work to do to heal those wounds. Trust, once broken, would take time to rebuild. We'll rebuild, Eli said, his voice firm. Together, we've come this far. Make it through this too. Zalia turned to look at him, her eyes softening. Yes, she agreed. Together. For the first time in a long while, Eli saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. He had watched her shoulder the burden of leadership, of being an empress who had to carry the weight of her entire species. But in this moment, there was something more. There was a possibility of a future where she didn't have to do it alone. Next few days were a whirlwind of decisions, repairs, and rebuilding. The court had been shaken, but there was a sense of unity slowly returning. The nobles who had conspired against Zalia were exiled, their influence gone. Many of the Zandari, warriors once unsure of Eli's place in their world, now respected him as a trusted ally. The traitors had been defeated, and the empire was beginning to heal. Eli was kept busy, helping with the reconstruction and offering his advice on how to bring the empire back to strength. It was strange to him at first that he was so involved in the future of the Zandari, but with each passing day, it felt more natural. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He had a place here. Zalia spent her time meeting with her generals and advisors, making sure the damage from the battle was addressed. But even in the midst of her duties, she made time for Eli. They spoke often, discussing their hopes for the future and the challenges they would face together. Despite the heavy responsibility Zalia carried, she had never seemed more alive one evening. As the stars began to shine brightly in the night sky, Zalia and Eli stood together on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the sprawling city below. The air was cool, but there was a sense of peace that had returned to the land. I never imagined my life would turn out like this, Eli said, his voice thoughtful. Zalia turned to face him, her expression calm but filled with understanding. None of us ever do, she said. But that's what makes the journey worthwhile. Eli smiled at her words. He had come so far from the man who had accidentally intercepted an alien message to now standing beside the Empress of the Zandari. He had learned so much about her people, their culture, and the immense responsibility that came with leadership. But more than that, he had learned about himself, about his strength, his ability to adapt, his growing connection with Zalia. Zalia took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the stars above. I've spent my life fighting to protect my people, she said quietly. But I've never allowed myself to truly live, not until you came into my life. Eli turned to look at her, his heart stirred by her words. He had always known that Zalia was a strong and capable leader. But hearing her speak so openly about her struggles made him realize how much she had sacrificed. You've built an empire, Zalia, Eli said softly. You've given everything for your people. You've done it with strength and grace. Zalia turned to him, her eyes searching his face. I've built an empire, but now I must rebuild it. I have to change. And so do you, Eli. We've both changed. Together, we can shape a future for the Zandari that no one ever imagined. Ali nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Together, they had overcome betrayal and war. Together, they had saved the Zandari Empire. And now, together, they would rebuild it. In that moment, Eli realized that his journey wasn't just about surviving in an alien world. It was about finding a place where he truly belonged. And in Zalia, he had found that place. In her strength, in her vision for the future, Eli had found his own purpose. The future of the Zandari Empire wasn't just in Zalia's hands, it was in theirs. Together, they would face whatever challenges came next.
At
Each other, they knew they could overcome anything. Zalia turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. Are you ready for the next step, Eli? Eli smiled, his heart full of certainty. Yes, he said. I'm ready. With that, the new beginning for both of them began.